welcome everyone to this Ask Me Anything session on architecture quality. We're here together, Kriti, myself, and also our head of products, Dennis Belsma. We're going to introduce the new feature called architecture quality that was launched earlier this month, to be exact on November 1st. You should be able to see it already in your Sigrid. And Kriti, who is sitting next to me, is going to introduce it to you in a broader manner. But before we do, I want to briefly look back at what we did last time, the previous Ask Me Anything session, which last time went about the Sigrid introduction, our platform that we use to measure your code quality and for you to actually govern around it. It was a very high level introduction. We'll do this every quarter, more or less. So if you have a need for that, please feel free to sign up for that. Again, it's going to happen early next year. But without further ado, this time we will focus more about Sigrid's architecture quality feature that we recently introduced. We'll talk about the history behind it, about the reason why we have it, and what you can do with it. And in the end, obviously, some quick tips and tricks. Kriti will show you around in the platform. But before we get there, I am curious. We have an audience of about 10 people, and I'm curious, what is your role in your organization? So I have a poll about that. I would be curious to know a bit more about you, so we can start focusing about that. All right, see the answers trickling in. We are at the entire group. It means that we have, as you can see, about half developers, half other, and one architect in the call. Cool. I have one more question before I hand over the screen to Kriti, which is about whether or not you already saw the feature. And I'm now trying to get it here. Yes, there we go. So did you already see architecture quality? Because it's been enabled for about a month now. I think this is a nice cue for you, Kriti, to start explaining what it is and what you can do with it. Yeah. Please do take it over.
Thank you, Hugo. Hi, my name is Kriti. I'm a feature consultant for this feature, which is recently introduced, that is architecture quality. I'm also guidance consultant at SIG. So in my daily role, what I do is I just guide my clients towards using the platform. And I specifically am appointed as a feature consultant for this architecture quality feature. So to get started and to give you a demo about it, I want to also tell you a brief story about where this is coming from. And last year, what we did at SIG was we formed a team internally, and that team, it chose a persona, and that persona was enterprise architect. What we did was we stepped into the shoes of that persona and tried to find out, understand how does their daily work look like and what are the problems that they face. And in this case, it was enterprise architects. We interviewed quite some people from different organizations, quite some enterprise architects. And then based on those interviews, what we gathered was these three common problems. So the first one was that their enterprise architects mentioned it to us that there is no direct power over backlogs. If you know a bit about enterprise architects, these are the people who are both technical and business skilled people. And what they have to do in their daily lives is first, they have quite some development teams working under them, but they do not prioritize these backlogs themselves. They do want to align the prioritization such that it aligns with the overarching organization goals. And the second thing that they do is that they align with CTOs and ask and show them data, and to also provide them insights where to invest money in which technologies and after how many years is this going to pay back to us. So while this is the case, as I mentioned, they do not, in the first case where they align with these development teams, they don't have direct power over the backlogs. This was the first problem that they shared. The second thing was enterprise architects, they do have a design picture in mind of their IT landscape. If you will ask them, they would also probably be able to draw it, but they don't know how does this look like in the implementation. So there's no picture that they can point it out that's coming from the source code automated that this is how my implemented architecture looks like. The third problem was that they lack reliable data for scenario decisions. Now, when I said that these people were businessy, they wanted to align with CTOs, they have to make decisions as to which technology should they choose. They lack this data as to which particular technology should I choose if I'm going to re-architect or rebuild a particular component with a team size of X. Then after how many years can I expect a return on investment? And these were the things that they mentioned to us were their common problems. And what we did then was we used these three core problems to devise a solution that we can provide in the platform. And that solution is this. The first one is the goal setting and coaching dashboard that we have introduced recently. And this is something that I know my colleague Ken gave an AMA last time. This time, what we are doing is this tracking this architecture evolution, which is the architecture quality, what it presents, and what is the problem that it solves for enterprise architects is that it gives you an image of how does your implemented architecture looks like. And the third thing, which right now is not yet in Sigrid, but will be soon, is the modernization scenarios, which will give you an insight. If you are going to refactor, replatform something, then how can you do it? What is the team size that you will put in? And after how many years can you expect that you will have a return on investment? But that's something that's upcoming. For this AMA, we are going to focus on the architecture quality. So with this story, I can imagine maybe the people who were actually developers would be thinking, is it even interesting for me? Then the answer is yes. When I say that we did dive into a single persona, and that single persona was enterprise architect, yes, this architecture quality platform initially came into existence by the interviews of these people. But while we were doing the second round where we validated these solutions with the audience, it was not just architects, there were also other people. And they highlighted to us that it is not just a feature for architects, but it is useful for other personas as well. So for example, for a manager, for a developer, and for a product owner. And you will see in a while how is this the case. But in just architecture quality is not just for architects, but it's for many other personas as well. Now, let's start with what makes architecture quality the most useful thing. And this is also something that we heard from when we did these interviews, we heard it from people, what made them think that this feature is very useful. So the first thing was that having this picture of the as-is architecture was very helpful. As I said in the beginning, if you will ask someone to draw a picture in your organization who knows about how this landscape is implemented, they would be able to draw one. But then having that picture in mind and having that picture physically available, there are two different things. And having that available just from the source code, that was actually very helpful. And the second thing that was very useful with this feature was just like maintainability, now you have something to which is quantified, which is objective, and which is benchmarked. So your architecture, you can compare it with the industry benchmark and see how you're doing. Are you doing better? Are you doing worse? Or are you doing as good as the industry is doing? So these were the two main things that people found very useful when they used architecture quality. Now, when should you use architecture quality? The first case which comes to everybody's mind is if there is a big bang architecture modernization. So let's say you have a component that's monolith and that's legacy, and now you want to move away from it and you want to group it into different components, and you want to structure it better. Yes, that's true. But how many times in a year, or let's say in our lives, do we do such big bang architecture modernizations? Those frequency is very less. But what we actually do in our daily lives is continuous architecture modernization. We have already a system. A part of it wants there's too much coupling. The architecture is quite entangled, and you want to reduce coupling. That's an example. There's a framework that you're using, there are two UIs, and you now want to standardize the front-end frameworks for those front-end applications. So such projects are something that we do on continuous basis. And while we are doing that, architecture quality becomes very handy. What you can do is you can focus on those particular components. You can check what are the other components these are interacting to. This gives you a picture in mind as to how can you break down your code. What am I going to impact when I'm going to make such a change? So architecture quality can be used not just for the big bang architecture modernizations, but it can also be used for these small continuous architecture modernizations that we do in our daily roles. Now, let's get into the architecture quality. The first thing, which is again a very frequently asked question, where I would say it is a little different from maintainability. In maintainability, you have a scope file, or let's say you have a configuration file. And in that configuration file, you specify your components. It can be manual, you specify a depth, but it is you who has to specify what these components are. Whereas it is a bit different in architecture quality. In architecture quality, this is automated. This can be picked up by themselves. So what we do is there's no magic here, but we just collapse the redundant root directories, and until we find a folder where all the redundant directories are collapsed, the first thing that we find that is seen as a component. And then you can further drill down into these components, which has other subcomponents. Now, this is also something that we are planning in the future. We might also introduce this to maintainability, because this makes, in terms of configuration, people's life easier. Otherwise, you have to specify what these components are. But for architecture quality, you don't have to do it. There's also another important thing. If you will compare architecture quality with the component dependencies that you have in maintainability, in maintainability, you specify a depth, and therefore you can only see the architecture at that particular depth or at that particular layer. Whereas with architecture quality, it allows you to go at different layers. And what I mean by that is, so when I say the components are auto-detected, there is a top level components that are detected, and which might look something like this. So let's say there's a front end, there's a back end, and probably there's a database attached. And that would be your high level picture if the components are very less. And this is something that people would agree to. So there's generally a consensus in the organization on the top level architecture. But when you actually drill down from this top level architecture to the layers below, it's where things starts to get interesting. Then the architecture actually looks like this. So if I'm going to focus on a front end application or a back end application, it might have other 10 subcomponents, and then that subcomponents can have other subcomponents, and things get interesting, because there you don't you know in your mind how this is interacting, but how actually in the implemented architecture it is doing, that picture should match. And in case it doesn't, then it gives you the moment, it provides you the moment for the conversation as to why this is the case, where in the first place we went a bit different, that the picture doesn't match anymore.
Kriti, while you're talking, there was a question. This is all really interesting. Do I need to write this down right now, or can I just find it somewhere else while...
Yes, so you don't have to write anything down. All of this is already available in our public documentation. And in a few slides from now, I will actually move to the platform. I'm actually going to move to the platform just now. And I will also show you where all of this can you find in the public documentation. So you don't have to make any screenshots. You don't have to write it down. Everything is already publicly documented, and I can show you where you can find it. I hope that answers that question. Is there any other question?
At the moment, no. I think so.
Okay.
Thank you.
Then let's move to the platform. So if I look at the platform right now, I'm in a demo portfolio. And this is something that I would also like to explain. If you are at your portfolio, then you might not be able to see architecture right at the portfolio level, because where architecture quality is enabled is at a system level. So what you need to do is, when you enter your Sigrid environment, then you go inside one of the systems. Let's say I'm going into Artemis, then you will see architecture being popped up here. So then you can click on architecture. There's an overview which gives you the benchmarking results, and also what are the metrics, what are the aspects that we measure for architecture. For example, for architecture, we measure how well it is structured, where does the knowledge lie in the components, how well does it communicate, what are the data access looks like, what is the technology stack being used, and how do the components evolve. So these are the aspects that we measure, and if you hover around it, you will find the highlights of the metrics that we measure, so that we can tell you how well is the architecture structured. For example, for structure, what we measure is how well is the code breakdown, are the components cohesive, is there a lot of components that are reused, is this communication centralized, so that you will find when you hover around it. Then the next thing is that you go to the picture that I was talking about. And as I said, these components, if you don't say anything, if you just look at the architecture, these are the components it will pick up from the SAS scan, from the upload itself. So you don't have to specify anything for what are my components. And as I mentioned, with maintainability versus architecture, this allows you to drill down inside these components. So for example, if there is this Hadoop project, then there's this magnifying button here. You can just go inside it. It will lead you to the next level. In this case, there was just one file inside it. But for example, I want to go inside UI viewer. So you can go inside UI viewer, it will open the subcomponents of the UI viewer, and then how these subcomponents are actually interacting with other components that are at the above layer of it. So also, I can imagine while you are looking at a system just like the one that I am looking at, things become complex when you start drilling down. And it doesn't, this canvas then doesn't become a lot handy when you have to do such things. So for that, what you could do is you can just use the file tree at the left side. And this file tree, if you want to look at a particular subcomponent, for example, you want to look at, let me find a nice one. So let's look at this one. Then you can navigate through the file tree and then look at the canvas, because if I'm going to do it via the canvas with so many lines, it becomes a bit more difficult than it would do it here. So this is the thing that is different from the maintainability component dependencies. Now I'm going to move back to my slide so that I can carry on with my storyline. So this is the first thing. Then the second thing is that with architecture quality, we have a lot of customizations that you can do, which with maintainability you don't have that much freedom, but with architecture quality, you have. The first thing is, since Sigrid does a SAST analysis, and SAST scan can have their own cons, and that one of the cons is sometimes there are some false positives, or let's say there are some, on the other side, it could be that there are some dependencies that are not detected by Sigrid. So in both of these scenarios, if there is a dependency that is detected but is a false positive, or in the other case, something that Sigrid could not pick it up by itself, in both these cases, what you can do is you can add or remove dependencies. So in your configuration file or in your YAML, Sigrid YAML file, what you have to do is you have to specify a section called architecture, and you can write add dependencies or remove dependencies, and you can write the source, the component name of the source and the component name of the target. What it is going to do is it is going to draw a line between those two components. And if you will specify what is the weight of such dependency, so let's say there are 4 calls made from backend to frontend, then you can also specify count is equal to 4, and that will lead to an arrow from backend to frontend with 4 on the line, which says there are 4 dependencies. I cannot show this in the platform itself because adding an I cannot do this in real time, but this is something that you can do if there is something missing in your architecture picture. The second thing that you can do is you can highlight unwanted dependencies. Now, what is unwanted dependencies? Let's say you have a design picture in your mind, and in your design, you did not intend to have a dependency between tools and UI portal. But now, when the Sigrid scanned your architecture, there's a picture in front of you. There is actually a dependency from tools to UI portal and vice versa itself. And you also looked into it. It's not a false positive. It is actually there, but you didn't want this to be there in the first place. So what you do is you set such dependencies undesirable so that everybody across the organization knows that this is something that we did not want in the first place, and you can highlight it for them that they know there's something wrong with this, and then you can of course communicate in your teams that why this is the case. What you have to do is you have to just, again, in your architecture section, you can write undesirable dependencies, write the source, write the target component, and then you can either set the bidirectional to true. That means both ways the dependencies are undesirable, or you can just remove it. Then one way that dependency is undesirable. And what it is going to do is it is going to show this dependency in red color. And to show you how this will look in the platform, so let's look here. So let me come out of this box. And there is this UI portal versus tools. And if you see, if I write that in my scope file, which I did for Artemis, then you see that this dependency has become red and it is highlighted. You can also find this if you open the legend. In legend, in the summary tab, you have many types of dependencies that are shown by these arrows. Code calls, data access calls, interface calls, and undesirable. Both of these are shown in dark blue, this one in turquoise color, and the last one in the red one. And these undesirable are the ones that you mention in the configuration file. The next thing that you can do in terms of customization with the architecture is grouping and annotating. With architecture, picture that is shown here, it is useful if you want to group subcomponents, give that group a name and write some annotation about it. For example, in this example, if I just group these two components, which is knowledge base and model, and I call this group knowledge base, and I can also annotate architecture knowledge base. Similar to this, I can show an example in this picture. So if I look at these two components, there is UI viewer and UI portal. I group them and I group them into this group, which is called legacy front-end applications. And I also wrote a note that these will be modernized during a UX unification initiative. So similar to this, what you can do with your architecture picture is you can group certain components. For example, you could also write which are the teams that maintained it and what are they probably going to do. You can annotate that. So there are many ways you can use this grouping and annotating feature so that you can make or look this picture a bit more organized than it looks already. Then the next thing that I want to talk about is how do you get these scores? So how do you get these ratings? If you are already aware about how maintainability works, we have a linear scale. And how does that work is for all the metrics, we have some risk profiles. And what we do is the least 5% of the benchmark results, we give it a 1 star. The highest 5% gets a 5 star. And then the rest of it is divided in middle with 30% each. Now, that's how, in general, the benchmarking works for most of the architecture quality metrics. But there are a few metrics that do not, or that are not benchmarked in the similar way. And to two of them are component freshness and knowledge distribution. What is happening there is that we have an expected number that we want you to meet. So for example, for a component, we would expect in terms of knowledge distribution, that these are the number of FTEs that are maintaining that particular component. If you deviate from what we expect, either that you are too low or you are too much, in both end of the spectrums, you score low. So you are penalized for both end of the spectrum. So you only get a good score if you are as close as to the expected number. And in this case, yes.
There's a question, Kitty. So you say that too few and too many people are both considered problematic, but isn't too few a much bigger problem than too many people?
Yes, correct. So I was actually getting to that point.
Okay.
And what I want to say in that is, while we do this, we do realize, and there were a lot of remarks and feedback that we already received about specifically for knowledge distribution and component freshness. Just the one that just came in is too few people is a much more bigger risk than having too many people on a component. And that's a fair remark, which is why what we are internally discussing is to make this benchmarking a bit more lenient than it is now. So yes, that is true, that with a few people, it is a much more risk than having too many people working on the same component. And we have heard this remark from a lot of our users. And as I said, we are internally deciding to move this scale, which is for knowledge distribution and component freshness, from this where right now we penalize on both the end of the spectrums, to make it linear, just like the one above. I hope that answers the question. Okay, so now let's also to explain which are these metrics. Let's move to the platform itself. So this is the summary tab, where you basically see everything. For example, you see the coupling which between the components. You also see the coupling from components to database. But there are also these metrics that you can dive into. For example, we were talking about knowledge distribution, where the rating is a bit different. So how does that work is, for example, let's take UI viewer. Now, UI viewer has an estimated average FTEs of 0.2, and the expected average FTE is 3.2. So if this is 0.2, then you are penalized because we expect 3.2, but then 0.2 is very low than the expected number. But if it was, let's say, 6.2, then it would also be the same. You would still score low because we are too high on the scale. So on that terms, we do recognize that having two less people is a, let's say, in terms of having two less people is a bigger risk than having too many people. Hence, in the coming time, we will make this scale a bit more lenient, so to say. And then there is also total authors, and this is also one of a question that is very frequently asked, like, what does total author mean? In this case, let's take an example of UI viewer again. There are 26 number of authors, which means this is the pure head count. So it could be that there is this one single person who just made one commit and never did a commit again. But we found unique unique names from the commit history, and that's where this headcount is coming from. So it is also people who regularly commit to this component, but also someone who just made one commit. So it is just unique headcount.
So maybe another question. You say unique headcount and names of people. Do we see those names somewhere?
So with the whole idea, I'm actually going to get this to my point with my slide. So if you look at how this architecture quality works is, we have these aspects that we are going to measure for your architecture, and these are the metrics that we do. In these metrics, there are these three particular metrics where if these are grayed out for your own system, that means we are not receiving your repository history. And there we need your repository history to be able to provide you a measurement for these three metrics. Now, when you asked Hugo if while we measure this repository history, do we also can see the names of these people who made this commit? The answer is no. And the whole idea behind this is to give you an estimation, where does your knowledge is there. So are there too many people or too less people? But we do not want to blame or shame some people about how many FTEs are they producing it. That's not the way to go. And therefore, while we measure these repository histories, we anonymize all the names. We do not scan the names of the developers. So we ourselves cannot see the names of the developer. What we do is we just use these histories, we anonymize the names, and then use the data for any of the measurements that we provide for these three metrics. Now, if you look at these metrics that on the above, these are what we measure from the source code. And there are different categories that these metrics can actually be divided into. So the first three metrics, if you look, they give you more of an insight from a functional decomposition perspective, that how well is your architecture structure? Is there logical decomposition in your architecture or not? The last three, they talk about the technical ownership. So which is the technology that's being used? Is it modern enough or not? Are my components frequently being maintained or not? Where does my knowledge lie? Is there too many people or too less people, as we just discussed? And then the central ones, they are about coupling. And these can further be divided into two categories, which is explicit coupling and implicit coupling, where explicit coupling actually stands for the coupling that you can see, that you can actually find in the code base directly. So there's a call from component A to B, and you can find it. And this is what we term as explicit coupling. Now, implicit coupling is that you do not directly see it, but it relies there. For example, let's say there's a piece of code that's duplicated in component A and also lies in component B. Most probably, when you're going to make a change in this part of the code, you don't have to make a change once, but twice. Hence, there is an implicit relationship there. Similarly, with bounded evolution, what we try to find with the commit history is, with your repository history, is where are changes being made together? What if there's you have to make a change in component A, and there's also another component that keeps changing, that has to be changed whenever you make a change in component A. So such dependencies you do not directly see in your code base, but then architecture quality with bounded evolution, you find these markers if there are two components being changed together always, or in most of the commits. So you will find these implicit dependencies being marked in these two metrics there. So let's go into the platform and look at it. So one thing about, as I mentioned, is explicit coupling. Now, summary tab is where you see a little bit of everything on these metrics. And then there is component coupling. What does component coupling show you is basically the direct calls, the explicit calls, as I mentioned. So what types of calls it is measuring is, you can find that in the legend. So there are code calls, there are interface calls, and there are calls that you define as undesirable. And you can also look at not just at the top level, but you can go, of course, inside and see how are the subcomponents interacting with other subcomponents or the other components. So you can also just look inside this, how are these being interacting. Then we have data coupling. So in summary tab, you see both code calls and data calls at one tab. But if you want to split together, if you just want to look at calls that are being made from components to data databases, then you go to data coupling. Whereas if you want to see calls that are made between the components, then you go to component coupling. So let's look at data coupling. What it shows is different components. It has a much more clearer view. It helps you investigate when you're looking at particular things. Then you don't want all the lines that your architecture has. So it gives different views so that you can investigate better what you're looking at. If you want to look at which components are accessed which are the components being connected to my database, then you look at data coupling and see which are the subcomponents accessing the database. Then we have these implicit calls, which is code reuse. So if you will look at it, these are the lines which are dotted lines. So these are not explicit calls. So there's not an explicit dependency from tools to UI viewer. But what it is trying to show you is that there are 950 instances of duplication between UI viewer and tools. It might be that when you are making a change in either of these files, then it's not just tools that you have to change, you also have to change UI viewer. Similarly, if you go to bounded evolution, which for this case, there is no line because this core screen, that means in the commit history, there was none implicit dependencies. But for example, if there was always a change made in Hadoop project and simultaneously there was a change often made with MapReduce. So if these two components are always changed together, then you will see an implicit dependency here in this tab. This is basically the gist of it. If you want to learn what are these specific metrics, there is already a lot of information available. So for example, if you go inside any of these metrics, what do we measure? You can find that in the explanation tab. So you will find a short explanation what it is trying to measure. But as asked in the beginning, do I need to record this or should I save this? The answer was no. And where you can find more information is if you go to this icon, which has been there for quite some time now. So if you go to this, it leads you to this documentation page. And in this documentation page, you can find, you can search about, of course, architecture quality, and you can read through what is there, what does it mean. And there are quite some nice videos that we have made with special cases as to if you're an architecture, what should you do about it, where should you dive in. But if you want to read much more detail about what these metrics mean and how does it apply to me, one thing that would be very handy is if you go to in references to quality model documentation, there is a guidance for producers for this particular feature, which is architecture quality. And there you will find all the details about the model itself, how do we do the aggregation, what are these particular metrics, what do they mean, what do we measure, what is the unit of measurement, and how can you score better. So all of that you can find in this. So it's worthwhile to give this a read to understand architecture quality better. I was wondering, are there any questions, Hugo?
Well, there was one more, and I was waiting for you to get back to the platform. So the question is, I don't see architecture quality in my environment. Maybe you can go over once more how you get here.
I can imagine because it is right now a bit hidden. So let's start fresh. If I am entering into the portfolio, then into your own portfolio, there are two levels. One is the portfolio level and one is a system level. So if you are at a portfolio level, you might not see the architecture tab on this blue bar because it is only available at a system level. Go inside any of the systems that you want to see the architecture for. In this case, let's choose Artemis again. If I am at Artemis, then I will find this architecture tab at the blue bar. So architecture is available inside a system. So if you're at a portfolio inside any of the system, in this case, Artemis, then you will find the architecture tab here. But if you are at the system level and you still don't have it, then you can reach out to support if that's the case for you, and then we will make sure that we enable it for you. But per 1st of November, architecture quality has been rolled out for all our clients, and you should be able to see it. But for any case that's it's not visible, please do reach out to us via the support button. You can just use this form here in the platform, just fill it in, and then we'll make sure to reach you out.
Thank you.
So in this particular AMA session, I kept it a bit high level introduction about this feature, and that's intentional. And the reason is this is recently rolled out. There are many people who are still exploring, as I understood from Hugo's poll as well. There were a few of you who have already seen it. Maybe a few of you already experimented and had some more questions about the interpretations, whereas others who still haven't looked at it. So to serve all of you and to have something that is understandable for all of us, I kept it from a very broad view, so from a very high level. But in our future AMAs, we hope to dive into these metrics, give you some best practices on how can you improve it, how can you make it a bit better, and how can you also improve your scores in your particular cases. So in the upcoming AMAs, we can, of course, dive into each of these metrics. For now, we just kept it at a very high level so that the basic questions are answered. Maybe there's one quick tip that I can share again. So when you're working with this picture, as I said, there's a lot of customizations that we already have. And the customizations that we do, you can also find that in the documentation. So if I go back to the documentation again, there's reference, there's this scope configurations. And if you go to the scope configurations and you go to architecture quality, you will find what all can you configure in terms of architecture quality in your configuration file or your YAML files. There could be that sometimes, as I mentioned in the beginning, we have now how can you make this picture as close to your reality, so you can remove and add dependencies. But there are also other things, for example, adjusting the period of history months. Now, as I explained, there are these three metrics that that architecture quality shows you, and they're based on your repository history. So if these three metrics are grayed for you, so you see a gray bar on them, that means we cannot measure it. That means we are not able, we haven't received your repository history. So if you want that these are enabled for you and you are able to see the results, make sure that you do have the repositories history included within the Sigrid CI script. Although, again, per 1st of November, this was enabled for everybody. And as I said, we do align with the GDPR guidelines so that we anonymize all the developers' name. But still, if for some reason it doesn't work for you as expected, make sure to reach out to support, and support can help you set this up. So about this history period, there are these three metrics that are related to this history. And by default, what we do is we take the history for last 1 year. But some people find that a bit long. They say a year for such metrics is just too long. I want to know where is my knowledge at the current moment limited. So I'm more interested in analysis that only relies on 6 months. I do not care about the whole year, because many people left and there are many people who join new. So I want to know what is my current status. And in that case, what you can do is you can adjust this history period, and then you can adjust it to 6 months or whatever you want to. And then what it will do is, in the platform for knowledge distribution and also for component freshness, you will see that right now it goes back to a year. It will then be as per your customization. So if it is 6 months, then it is only going to analyze your code base for the past 6 months in terms of commit history. So there are much more customizations than I explained in my slide. So there are more available. I would strongly recommend you to go through this page in the documentation, which allows you what all can you customize. So there are a lot of things that you can do, and this might just help you bring this picture that Sigrid shows you as close as to your reality. So if there are some false positives, make sure you can fix it. And if that's the case, if there is specific thing that you cannot find in the configurations, please reach out to us. We can help you. If there's not the case, we can internally find something. We can add more customization so that this picture is what you intend to have in the first place. Okay, so I see we are almost at the end of the hour, and I will give back the mic to Hugo so that he
Yeah.
can do a wrap up.
Sure, I will. Thank you, Kriti. What I'm gonna do is briefly look back. I mean, about 50 minutes ago, we got started at this slide. We got started at the point of the challenges that many of our customers, many of our enterprise architect customers have. And they revolve around these three things. What we did and what we found is that the architecture quality feature that Kriti talked about in depth about the technical implementation and the usage of it from a developer level, then eventually, if you pick it up and take it one step higher, support you in, for example, cloud migration situations. So figuring out what kind of components are ready to move to the cloud and what components you have to do some work on. Or maybe some modernization scenarios or onboarding new people. Think about a documentation scenario where you have a very old system that has been around for a long time and a lot of people are leaving and coming new to the organization journey. Meaning that, well, it's hard to figure out what the particular architecture of that system is. Architecture quality solves this, and eventually in Sigrid shows you the implemented architecture to support all these ways. Maybe there's even something that I didn't mention here. Your use case could also be part of that. But if you have anything else, we would be curious to know. That said, before we dive into the next sessions, a little bit looking back at the documentation. Kriti already mentioned it. I have a few screenshots of places where you can find more information. The FAQ, many questions that are asked are written down there and answered there. How to set it up, you saw the page already, and the architecture quality page in general, what is it? So for you to reread all the information afterwards. All of this is in the documentation as well, so you don't have to write it down. You can find it back as per what Kriti said and the link down below. If we look forward to the next AMAs, we had 8 now, and number 9 is coming up. It's in December 14 when Michiel Kuipers, our SSM, our support manager, is going to talk about the most frequently asked questions. Most frequently asked questions could be about this. So there's a few that we already heard today, but also things that he sees within the support team. So we're going to wrap up the entire year and see what are the most asked questions. Then early next year, we are going to talk about portfolio objectives. It's a recently released feature as well. It's something different from architecture quality, but it is available for all of you. You can already see it in your platform as well. But we're going to spend more time on that in January together with the Ask Me Anything session and more follow-up documentation as well. But please do sign up already for the upcoming AMAs because they are here for you. That brings us to the end, about 5 minutes before, 5 minutes ahead of time. Thank you for your attention, and I hope to see you next time.